Welcome back to another episode of the Jacob Johnston Show. Well, yes, Biden continues his promise to return the country to normalcy under his administration. Of course, normalcy under a Democratic rule means incompetence, corruption, and abuse of power. Well, another normal for a Democrat administration has reared its ugly head. It is whenever something scandalous happens, I know nothing about anything that is going on in government. Take a look.
Federal investigators searched the home and the office of Rudy Giuliani as part of an investigation into his time as President Trump's attorney, his dealings with Ukraine. Were you aware of that raid before it happened?
I give you my word, I was not. I made a pledge. I would not interfere in any way, order, or try to stop any investigation the Justice Department had underway. I learned about that last night when the rest of the world learned about it. My word. I had no idea this was underway.
Well, there you have it, folks. Just like Obama, there is absolutely zero accountability for anything. He knows nothing about anything that's going on anywhere inside or outside of government. But of course, with Biden, I guess that is believable. You know, you're lucky if he wakes up in the morning and has a clue where he's at. But anyways, this is just like what happened during the Obama era, where anytime something big happens, any targeting of political opponents, any emergence of a potential scandal, oh, I didn't know anything about it. I only found out about it when the news broke. The FBI works for the executive branch. Anything of this nature would need to get some sort of approval or at least some sort of information. But of course, he knows nothing about anything. He can't be accountable for anything. He knows nothing. In government, all these agencies just act completely autonomously with absolutely no input from the leader of their executive branch. Right? It is zero accountability whatsoever. And that's how they get away with trying to insulate a Democrat president from all these scandals, is just claim ignorance. But remember, Joe Biden had also gone out there and said, you know, he had no knowledge, no information, no awareness about the illegal spying operation on President Trump. And yet we have found out from records that that was a complete and total lie. He was involved. He was informed. He did give his tacit approval for that spying operation. All right, so we know he has a history of lying about what he doesn't know, about not being involved. We know that under Democrats, the government is used as a weapon against political opponents. And what's interesting here is as we go through and we take a look at what the FBI did, they wanted to target Rudy Giuliani, the President Trump's personal attorney, former personal attorney, I'm not sure what his current status is, who was looking into the Biden crime family, right? So they wanted to go off and raid anything about any evidence or any information that he had gotten from Ukraine about the Biden crime family's crooked dealing. But when it comes to the evidence of the Biden crime family, such as the hard drive of Hunter Biden, the FBI doesn't want to take that, because if the FBI takes that, they have to examine it. And if they examine it, well, then they have to investigate it. So as long as they can avoid collecting any evidence of a crime committed by the Biden crime family, they can avoid the investigation. So when we take a look at these things, and this happens all the time, if a Republican is accused of something, the government is quick to act. You know, search warrants, seizures, early morning raids. They're going off and trying to engage in all types of prosecutions. It doesn't matter that they don't have any actual verified evidence of any criminality or any crimes. In fact, when it comes to the Republicans, we have found out that the Democrats will take information paid for by the Democrat Party to open up investigations against Republicans. Made up information. They don't bother to verify the information or try to see if they could corroborate any of the information that the Democrats pay someone to give to the FBI. right? We know that they lie to the FISA court. We know that they doctor and manipulate evidence in order to justify spying operations against Republicans or to investigate and attack Republicans that are considered the political opponents of the Democrats. And yet, when it's a Democrat, it doesn't matter how solid the evidence is. They drag their feet. They try to avoid the evidence. If they can't avoid the evidence, they drag out the investigation. Remember with Hillary Clinton, how she violated the Espionage Act and how they didn't do any investigation? They pretended, but then they gave everybody complete and total immunity before they got into any interviews, and how they didn't do anything. And then they basically changed the laws without approval by Congress in order to avoid charging Hillary Clinton with the crimes that she committed. So we're supposed to believe that the FBI is not political and that the Democrats are not, running the FBI or determining who they do and do not investigate, and yet they will engage in endless, baseless investigations against the Republicans and avoid investigations against the Democrats no matter how solid the evidence. Yes, we have complete corruption and abuse of power. This is what normalcy looks like. And of course, Biden, it doesn't matter how many times he has been caught lying in the past about what he did and did not know, about what he was and was not involved in. The media will take him at his word and just promote him. Well, you can trust him. He's honest. See, that's another thing when it comes to the media. Democrats can lie, get caught in lie after lie after lie, and we're supposed to just trust them. They're honest people. There is nothing, that we can question about what they say. We could take it at face value. And yet with Republicans, they will accuse of lying constantly without any evidence of any history of lying against those politicians. Now, yes, I get it with Trump. He could exaggerate. I mean, what's the definition of the best ever? I mean, that's more of a subjective opinion than it is a fact-based statement, right? And you can't fact check or claim that someone is lying about an opinion over what they think is, better than something else, right? That is subjectivity, not a lie. And then you could go through an embellishment, and then you can also say, well, by what metrics? If you're trying to go with this metric in order to say that he's lying, but he's telling that statement based off of this metric over here, well, then based off of the metrics that you use, okay, but you get that. But it is amazing here that we are back to the days of I know nothing about anything that has any whiff of scandal, even though it's happening and only seems to happen under the administration of the Democrats. Government by nature is abusive with power because it's filled with people who want power, who want control, and seek to always expand power. And those who may not be at the top of government seek to expand their own power and will always go and side with the party that goes through to expand government power, because expanded government power expands the power of those who serve in the various areas of government. Massive corruption, no accountability, and it's always amazing how the government always targets Republicans and how they avoid investigating Democrat scandals like the plague. Like investigating a Democrat scandal is a pandemic that must be avoided. So we'll go through and go on these endless witch hunts against Republicans and their allies. Sickening. Just utterly sickening, and they get away with it every single time. Nothing but complete, total, massive corruption. Okay, and speaking of other corruption, Andrew Cuomo finds himself in deeper and deeper water. It looks like the Democrats are finally going to be tossing him out because, well, while he was convenient during the election, as more information comes out, he becomes politically toxic.
The media of ignoring this story, but we are not. Damning new details reveal just how far New York disgraced Governor Andrew Cuomo's senior aides reportedly went to conceal the number of nursing home deaths during the pandemic. The New York Times reports that Cuomo's office stopped health officials from publishing the real number of nursing home data for months.
Now, what gets to me here is the Democrats' complete and total hypocrisy. They always try to rewrite the history to make it seem like they were the ones that took the coronavirus seriously early on and were the ones urging action, when in reality, they were denying it, downplaying it, telling everybody to ignore all the warnings coming out of the Trump administration so that they could get the virus spread as far and as fast as possible. They wanted maximum impact from the coronavirus because they viewed it as politically convenient. And your death, well, that's an acceptable price for the Democrats in order for them to be able to gain political power. And so it's been amazing also to see how the Democrats can go off and say, follow the science, follow the science, follow the science. And yet, the areas that had the worst response to COVID, the areas that had the most deaths due to COVID, were the areas in control by the Democrats. So if you see here, you take a look at the Republicans, which they say we're not following the science or endangering people. They have lower death rates. They had, more containment of the coronavirus. They had the better response. And yet the Democrats, claiming to be leaders, had more infections, more deaths, and worse responses. I mean, heck, they weren't even utilizing all the resources that were given to them in order to address it. Why? Well, they needed something to go after Trump with, and this was convenient. Who cares if a few people dies as long as the Democrats get into power? So the Democrats follow the science, and apparently them following the science led to more deaths than those who were, quote, not following the science. But let's be honest here. Cuomo was, the worst of the worst leaders. And yet they gave him awards, a book deal and all that, claiming leadership on the coronavirus. And here it is. In this particular case, he was responsible for so many nursing home deaths because he was not following the science like he was trying to claim he was. And that, I almost wonder how purposeful it was putting COVID patients into nursing homes and how much it was intended to actually cause as much death as possible. And the media is just as responsible. CNN, NBC, MSNBC, ABC, CBS, all of those networks that were promoting Cuomo and trying to help him cover up the amount of deaths in nursing home are just as culpable and have just as much blood on their hands as Cuomo does when it relates to those who died in the nursing home because of COVID. They were complicit in the cover-up. Now, while the reporting of COVID deaths, while they would report the number of deaths, they tried to obscure where those deaths were coming from so that they couldn't, pin down what policies or actions by the Democrats increased the number of deaths. They were trying to avoid accountability for their actions, but they wanted to be able to get the numbers out there of how many people died. So they would report the death rate, the deaths. And they were inflating the death rates. People die in motorcycle accidents. Oh, we'll just add them to a COVID death. People die of a heart attack. Well, we'll just say that's COVID related. People, die of suicide, take a gun and shoot themselves. Oh, that was COVID. Hey, this person died. Do we know whether or not he had COVID? I don't know. I'll just add him to the count. Right? So we have no accurate reporting, accounting, or any information whatsoever. And at this point, we never will. But they wanted to make sure as many people died as possible and then add as many people as they think that they could, regardless of whether or not they actually did die of COVID. But they wanted to ensure as many people died as possible so that they can use it and attack at in order to gain political power. And then they had discovered that as they were doing this, that they could then find a way or use it as an excuse to violate the Constitution in order to run illegal elections that violated their own state laws, and thus violated the Constitution in order to get the results that they wanted. So they were okay with all the cover-ups. They were okay with ensuring that the virus spread as far and wide as possible and as many people as possible would die, because they thought that was an acceptable price. You know, that's the story here. And as the information comes out, more and more information, and everybody knows how bad the pandemic, was as far as, lockdowns, disruption of our lives, destruction of the economy, and all of that. And now the information is coming out, and Cuomo, who was just a good little soldier for the left, ensuring maximum impact as possible. Well, in order to do that, he had to basically engage in actions that he cannot escape from. So now he's supposed to fall on his sword and resign from office. Although I'm not sure Cuomo realized what he was signing up for in going through and trying to maximize the impact of COVID, because he wasn't having any intentions that he would have to resign at the end of this. He thought, he was a good soldier, he would be rewarded. But with so many people now taking a look at COVID and trying to analyze the results over who was actually the good leader, who wasn't, who was actually responsible for the deaths that took place. And they're finding out more and more that it was the Democrats whose failed leadership and purposeful, incompetence led to massively more deaths than what there would be otherwise. People are going to realize that, hey, the Democrats were the problems here. They were the failed leadership. Hey, why did all these deaths occur worse in Democrat-controlled areas? And so they need the story to go away. They need to get Cuomo out of office so people stop focusing on it and go away. And you notice how they delayed the reporting. They tried to block the reporting. And I'm willing to bet that Cuomo is not the only person that delayed, covered up, and tried to hide just how bad their policies were and how their policies resulted in more deaths. He's probably, though, the biggest and worst offender of it. So they got to get him out to get the story out of the headlines before people realize what the Democrats did and why they did it. I mean, these people have no problems with mass murders of babies, for crying out loud. You think they give a rip how many of you had to die in order for them to maintain a political narrative in the media and try to retake political power and to try and run the elections illegally in violation of the state laws and Constitution? No. They got to keep you distracted and looking the other way. They can't have this information coming out. They can't have these leaks. They cannot have this type of investigation showing just how crooked, corrupt, and how much deaths the Democrats were willing to accept in order to gain political power. All right. Now, of course, Biden, gave his State of the Union, which is just a political speech. I've been trying to look through, see if anything important actually happened. It was a yawn fest. Although I will say COVID probably did give a lot of people an excuse not to show up so that they wouldn't be caught bored out of their mind, falling asleep during the speech. But Tim Scott gave a reaction. And there's a part of Tim Scott's reaction that I think is very important and hits the nail on the head. Take a look.
When America comes together, we've made tremendous progress, but powerful forces want to pull us apart. 100 years ago, kids in classrooms were taught the color of their skin was their most important characteristic. And if they looked a certain way, they were inferior. Today, kids are being taught that the color of their skin defines them again. And if they look a certain way, they're an oppressor. From colleges to corporations to our culture, people are making money and gaining power by pretending we haven't made any progress at all, by doubling down on the divisions we've worked so hard to heal. You know this stuff is wrong. Hear me clearly. America is not a racist country.
And he's absolutely right about this. Look, the left, they never stopped being racist, hateful bigots. The only thing that's changed about the left is marketing and motivation. So let me go through here and try to do the marketing. Instead of trying to market racism to white Europeans, they market blatant racism to minority groups. And they do so by trying to promote them as victims, and that if you encounter someone with white skin, that they are an oppressor out to get you. They promote hatred and racism to minorities because, well, they can't continue to promote hatred and racism to a group of people that have fought so hard to get over racism and get past, the mistakes of the past, So there is that, and they try to go through and do victimhood as early on as possible. But it's also the motivation. See, whereas before the left had promoted racism and bigotry and sexism because they had actual belief in superiority of skin colors or, of people with certain genitalias, they do so now just for money and power. To be able to profit. You take a look at Black Lives Matter. They are a hateful, racist, terrorist organization, but they make a lot of money. We already know that the leaders of Black Lives Matter are moving to multi-million-dollar homes, buying multiple homes, while trying to promote the idea that if you are black in America, you are oppressed, victimized, even today in 2021. Now, there was some truth to that in the past. Of course, that actual victimhood and oppression was being committed by the Democrats, but, that seems to be lost on so many today who don't actually know their history. But they do so for profit. Why? Well, they need to keep the country divided in order to maintain their profits and power. See, when people come together and unify and start working towards a common goal, that promotes, better understanding, education, learning, advancements in technology, and being able to, just get along, unify, and advance. What happens when we work together? We understand each other. We debate ideas. We look at the pros and the cons. We go through and we may experiment with those ideas to find out which idea provides a better result. But in doing so, we become a community, self-reliant, helping each other out, which means we don't need government. We don't need as much government. And yet a disunified country with people, at each other's throat, no advancement, want bigger government. And because the government can come through after we have been divided and promise, we'll solve that for you, we'll solve that for you, rather than us coming together to solve the problems for ourselves without government. Because when government gets involved, they grow themselves, they grow their power, they grow their authority, and they grow their control over you. People coming together unified to solve problems and make advancements, right, are a group of people that believe in the limitations of government and the big R rights of the individual. And that is contrary to the power abusive authoritarian controls that the left enjoys. But it also about the profit. See, when people come together and work on a problem and find a solution to it, it disrupts business. Every advancement that has gone on throughout human history has resulted and a disruption of the current business, of the current status quo. And those who are in power don't want disruption of the current status quo, because disruption of the current status quo usually means that the new businesses take out the old businesses, which is also why a lot of businesses really love the Democrats, because the Democrats implement policies that kill innovation, that create barriers to entry of new businesses, and provide protection to the old guard, provide protection to the already established companies so that they don't get taken out by better, newer competition that can offer better products and services at lower prices. So they want to protect their profits, keep innovation down, keep disruption down, keep the status quo. Well, the status quo will be disrupted with a unified people working towards a common goal. So they must ensure that we do not achieve unity. They must ensure that we remain divided so that they can continue to conquer. Right? And so, yes, I mean, what really is the difference between the Democrats in the past teaching people that if you have this skin color, you are oppressed and inferior, and today saying if you have this skin color, you are a horrible garbage person who is an oppressor, even though you haven't actually done anything to such effect? All right, what is the difference? And so you go through and you take a look at that, and you got to take a look at the goal: divide and conquer. Keep us divided so that they can continue to conquer. Keep the status quo so new businesses, new innovations don't keep emerging, disrupting and taking out the millionaires and billionaires who currently run the top corporations that are in effect today. They want to protect themselves, so they got to keep us divided and at each other's throats. And that's the whole basis of the left. And that's what's going on with all these businesses siding with the left, trying to implement leftist policies. Because let's face it, since the United States was founded, we have seen more advancements in humanity. More advancements towards equality, technology, and understanding than what was experienced in the previous 5,000 years. Right? Think about how much that has changed, how much disruption that was, and what effect that had on our country finally breaking the tyranny of authoritarian dictators and kings and actually promoting God-given individual rights. The rights of the individual to come together, to be able to explore their own interests, have rights to their own development, the motivation that created. It was a revolution technologically and the advancements of human civilization, the likes of which haven't been seen before. I mean, think about how many, thousands of years people were riding on horsebacks, using swords, and the most advanced weapon was probably the bow and arrow, right? Then, of course, over the course of 5,000 years, the biggest advancement was the discovery of gunpowder with the musket, right? But then take a look at, since the United States was founded, the technological revolution. Heck, look at how I'm communicating now, with you. The camera, the computer, even a microphone has been more advancement than what was seen before the United States. And of course, every democracy that has risen, which is few and far in between throughout the history of the world, there have been advancements in human civilization, have been advancement in knowledge, but none like what we have seen since the rise of the United States. But every one of those democracies fall. Why? Because people in power seeking to maintain their own power, they go through to divide the country, to create an us versus them mentality in order to run their election campaigns, in order to get elected, in order to stay in power. And then as part of that, they also do what? They promise stuff. They promise stuff out of the treasury. Hey, vote for me, I will give you this money. Hey, vote for me and I'll take this away from this person and give it to you. Right? And then people get to understand that. And so the division continues to grow and grow and grow. The corruption grows and grows and grows. And the politicians get out of control with their spending and their whole take from those who have to give it to those who don't. And then what happens? Democracy collapses and authoritarian tyrants rise. And if the left has any understanding of history, then the only conclusion can be made is that they are trying to, as best they can, accelerate that process to end democracy so that they can rise as the authoritarian power. But all of that is to say that Tim Scott is absolutely right. The left is doing everything that they can to try and keep this country as divided as possible because of profit and power. And the biggest threat to the profit and power of the current, authoritarians that are in the left that control so much now, the biggest threat to them is a unified and well-informed people working for a common goal. Okay, and to get back with that, speaking of corruption, abuse of power, the whole, promise the world, we'll give you everything if you just vote for us. Biden is back now, promising that big government is back.
Tom, talking about the president's view of the role of government, if you will. The president in that speech last night, a lot of folks heard the president's speech and basically heard something we hadn't really heard in generations. The era of big government is back. President Biden made the case to me again this morning that government is capable of doing big things and that we should start expecting more from government.
Oh, yes, the era of big government is back, which, under Biden, they're trying to make that true. $1 trillion here, $1 trillion spending there. Hey, $1 trillion spending on everything. The era of big government is back. And of course, Biden's claim is that, the government is very competent and able to do much more and do more good. And I would like to ask him, show me an example of where big government has actually worked. Show me an example of that, because I can't find any. Wherever you see big, massive government, you see waste, fraud, abuse, and massive corruption. Government is incompetent at doing 99% of the things that they want to do. The only thing that government is competent at, or has been competent at, is national security. The U.S. military protecting the country. But beyond that, I have seen nothing but complete and total incompetence when it comes to big government programs, and big government spending. It's always fraud, waste, and abuse. You get, poor results. If you get, poor results, that, just saying poor results is actually probably more of a compliment to the reality. The government sucks. They can't do anything. Why? Because they don't base any of their decisions on facts or reality. They base it off of political narratives. They base it off of the idea that, hey, you know what? We're just going to try and give you money over here, you money over here. We're just going to, dole out some money and hope something good happens. And it never does. They base it off of political narratives, political ideology, but it's never based in facts. They never take a look at what the actual root cause of a problem is and devise a solution based off of that. They don't. Not that they could, because they don't understand it, because government is filled with a bunch of elitists who have no idea or understanding of how the rest of us live, have no idea of what the root problem is, because they don't spend any time in the communities actually taking a look at what's actually happening. They spend all their time disconnected in DC, all of them millionaires with lifestyles that the rest of us could only dream of. Being able to have the really big fancy houses, the chauffeurs, multiple homes, most of us, we can't afford that. We try to go for, maybe we can get one home that we spend, 20, 30 years trying to pay off, but they spend their time up there as part of the top, 1 to 5%, trying to analyze what's going on without actually being part of the community or taking a look at what's going on. They have no ability to solve any problems. In fact, time and time again, we see that government, especially big government, causes more problems than what it solves. For instance, take a look at the student loan crisis. The government tries to do more and more money for college education, make more and more money available. And what happens? The cost of education keeps going up and up and up, and student loan debt keeps getting worse and worse and worse. Why? Because of government intervention. See, the colleges take a look at all of the money that the government is making available for college education in the form of guaranteed federally backed student loans. And so what the colleges are doing is going, hey, you know what? We want to capture as much money as possible. We want to be able to, rake in as much as possible so that we can, pay these these professors and teachers outlandish wages. We want to build this rec center. We want to build that. We want to just spend. So we want to rake in as much as possible. So what do? They take a look at how much money is available and they go, okay, well, we're going to raise our prices. We're going to raise tuition because more money is available. And then people have to take out more money to attend those institutions. And what's the government response? Let's make even more money available. And what's the response? Oh, let's raise tuition even more. We need a second rec center. We need all of this. And you know what? We're also going to charge the students these student activity fees, regardless of whether or not they actually engage in any student activities. So we're going to force them to pay for something that they don't want, that has nothing to do with college education. And we're going to justify it. I don't know how, but as more and more money is doled out by the government for college education, the more expensive that college education becomes. And the end result is students are left with a massive amount of debt for an education that employers say that they need in order to get a job, that the job does not provide enough pay in order to meet your obligations for those student loans. There is an example of government getting involved in a situation and making things worse and worse and worse. And yet, if the government were to take away all federal funding for college education, what would happen? Colleges trying to, keep students coming through the doors in order to keep the college open and keep themselves employed would start cutting costs, would start lowering tuition because they need to start competing for students. And the only way to really compete for students is quality of education, yeah, but also price and affordability. And so prices would come down as federal funding for education goes down so that they can be the institution that attracts the students so that they can stay up, they can stay afloat. And then you would see a lowering of price, a lowering of student debt, and people able to meet their financial obligations of paying back their student loans. You understand? So the government here, which under Biden, which is saying big government is back and that government can do more. It's the government that created the problem of student loan debts. And yet, if you got rid of the government involvement, the debt crisis and the cost of college education would come down. That is one of the best, most perfect examples of how big government causes problems that they claim that they are in it to solve. Now, you're trying to go off and say what about other programs? Social Security. Social Security has been another disaster. They have raided, mishandled it, stolen money from it. And now people went off. Now, when Social Security first came out, Sure, it sounded good. It was funded. It had ability to be paid. But now, after decades of the government abuse and corruption, stealing money out of Social Security, what happens? Social Security is a horrible program. It's a horrible program. It pays no less than minimum wage, starvation. But they've been going through and trying to promote Social Security as your standalone retirement. No, you must, go into this with the belief that Social Security is going to disappear and save up and be responsible for your own retirement, creating your own, savings in your 401k, your IRA. I would go with a Roth IRA, but I have a feeling that the Democrats would try to take away the tax-free benefit of a Roth IRA. You got to save up for your own retirement. Otherwise, you're going to end up broke, unable to afford to live, go anywhere, enjoy retirement. All you could do is maybe, if you're lucky, sit in a small apartment and rot. And yet the Democrats want to claim that is a very successful program. And because the government got involved and created Social Security, that created the problem of people thinking, oh, Social Security will be there to take care of me at retirement. And that's how the government pretty much promoted the whole program. So people stopped saving for their retirement. People started just spending what they had as they made it without any concern about saving for their retirement, because after all, Social Security would be there to take care of me. So there's yet another example of the government stepping in, trying to solve a problem, and made it worse. Everywhere, take a look at everything, and you see nothing but more government equals more problems. And this is why, Biden's whole era of big government is back is just another example of how the left is just completely and totally devoid of reality, and why big government sucks, because it's not based on the facts. It's not looking at the root cause, the root problems, and developing solutions. It's about developing a political narrative by out-of-touch people who have no idea how the rest of us actually live, who have no idea what the problems the rest of us actually encounter are, and then out of pure ignorance, try to devise a program to solve a problem they don't know what the cause of, with a solution. For instance, let me see if I can, use an analogy here to better explain the problem with government. See, if you look at someone like me, right? Obviously, I'm a little bit on the overweight side, to put it politely. What is it? Fatties Anonymous. That Mark Levin says, so yes, I'm a little bit on the overweight side. Now, the government would look at me and go, you just need to eat less, exercise more, right? That would be their blanket solution. But that doesn't actually work in my situation, right? Because I've tried all types of diets, exercise regularly, and not lose anything, right? So the whole eat less, exercise more would be what they say, and all the experts on the left would say that is the issue. But if the issue is, say, a hormonal imbalance of some sort, well, dieting and exercise may not be, the solution. It would needing to take supplements or some type of an injection in order to get metabolism up. Or if the issue is a thyroid problem, if I don't address the thyroid issue, then dieting and exercise may not lead to any results whatsoever, because the solution of just dieting and exercising doesn't necessarily correlate to the root cause of the problem, whether that be a thyroid issue, a metabolism issue, or a insulin issue, or a hormonal imbalance issue, or there's actually a lot of different causes for being overweight that, if not addressed, diet and exercise does not solve. But the government would ignore trying to find out which one of those problems is the root cause. of why it is that I am unable to lose weight and why I am on the overweight side. They would just say, blanket solution, diet and exercise. But they don't take a look at what the root cause of the problem is. You understand that, right? I mean, I eat salads, spinach, lettuce, tomatoes, carrots. I try to eat more proteins, and I try to eat as little carbs as possible. I, have my fitness apps, where I try to track my fitness, my walks, my, trying to jog, which, with bad knees is not the easiest thing to do. I still have an Xbox 360, and I use a fitness game, on there that's supposed to have a personal trainer. So I've ran endlessly on treadmills, on exercise bikes, and never lose any weight, right? So my wife, and this is where, I didn't know that, other problems such as thyroid issues could be the cause of overweight. I'm not a medical doctor. And, but my sister-in-law, does have a nursing degree and keeps up with that, and was the one to explain how thyroids could play into not being able to lose weight and weight gain. And so, taking a look at it, I'm going to be looking at some sort of, actual specialist that will try and narrow down and focus on what the actual root cause is that's making it so hard to lose weight, so that I can actually address the specific problem. But you see, it never occurred to me that thyroids could play a part in weight and your ability to lose weight, right? And just like I didn't know that, the government, when they try to implement these big government solutions, don't actually know what the problem is. They don't investigate what the problem is. They just come up with, a generalized theory, based off of what they think is a one size fits all, and then tries to ram it down. And because of that, at best, they don't change anything. And at worst, they make it worse. Right? Plus, in order to fund all these big government programs, they need to take money away from people, take money out of the economy. That means, if you go by Biden, we're going to take it from the millionaires and the top 1% and corporations. Okay, so you're punishing people for success. So, hey, why go out there and be successful if doing so is going to be in punishment? And the harder you work, the more money the government takes away from you for those who are not willing to work as hard or put in the commitment or exert the financial responsibility. But two, when you take money away from corporations and all that, you are reducing their ability to invest in innovation, grow the business, to create new jobs. You're taking away money for increased salaries, all of which we were seeing under the Trump tax cuts. Increased salaries, growing businesses and adding more jobs to the workforce, which led to lowest unemployment. We saw people lifting out of poverty. But government wants to take that away so that businesses have less money to increase wages, less money to invest in research, development, and innovation, right? And where does that money go? It goes to the government, where it eventually just goes down the toilet, right? Because when you put money out of the economy and give it to government, what happens? You got fraud, waste, abuse. That money doesn't all go towards the intended goal. The government decides to spend it in all different directions. As it goes through each bureaucracy, more and more money, it just evaporates and disappears. And then what you get is what money is invested by, back by government after of what they took out. It's less than what they took. And the results are less than what it would be if they just left it in the private market. Now, I know they try to go, well, the companies and corporations invested in stock buybacks. Yes, which benefited people's retirement accounts. because it raised the value of the stock. That means if you had an IRA, a 401k, and the companies that you were invested in bought back the stocks on the open market and decreased the supply of stock, that means your stock became more valuable. That means you had more money for retirement. And the Democrats want to say that is a bad thing. And yet, as we go with government spending, not only do they take money out of the economy, but even worse, they continue to borrow money because there isn't enough money upon the millionaires and billionaires in this country to pay for the programs the government wants to institute under Biden. Well, if they don't have enough money, that means they borrow it. And what does that do? It causes inflation. As they borrow money and print more money, it devalues our currency. And as that happens, our money becomes worth less and less and less. And the cost of living, products, goods, services, even the basics, food, shelter, clothing, transportation, and electricity, utilities, the prices of that keep going up and up and up because the government, with their big government programs and massive spending, is crushing, deflating, and just completely destroying the value of currency. I mean, if big government programs actually worked, explain Venezuela. Oh, let me guess. They just didn't do it right, which is always the excuse. And so big government always ends up making everything worse. They'll even take something that wasn't even a problem and make it a problem. There has never been an example of anything government has done outside of military protection for the country that they have done competently, free of abuse and fraud, and no situation in which a new government program actually made anything better. But yet, they need to expand government because they want to expand their control over you. And as they expand their control over you, it feeds their ego because they now have more power. They have more control themselves. It satisfies their authoritarian nature. And it creates, dependency upon these government programs. So, of course, you're going to vote to keep them in power because you lose confidence in your ability to take care of yourself. Now, expanding government programs makes everything worse, but it feeds the ego and authoritarian nature of those in government, from those at the top who have complete control over everything to the middleman whose position allows them more of a feeling of control, power, and prestige over every aspect of your life. All right. Now, there are some lowlights from Biden's State of the Union address. There are no highlights. They're all lowlights. But there's three in particular here that I do want to address as I was watching what other people's comments were on the State of the Union. But there's three things that stood out to me, and here they are.
No one should have to choose between a job and a paycheck. How do we pay for my jobs and family plan? I will not impose any tax increase on people making less than $400,000. But it's time for corporate America and the wealthiest 1% of Americans to just begin to pay their fair share. Congress should pass H.R. 1 and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and send it to my desk.
Okay, so those are my top three lowlights out of everything that I've seen so far. So remember what I meant, or what I said, when I said government creates more problems because they don't understand what the problem is that they're trying to solve. So let's get into the first statement here. You shouldn't have to choose between a job and a paycheck. I'm very confused. I even made special note of this particular statement, not having to choose between a job and a paycheck. Where the hell do you think a paycheck comes from? If the government is just doling out money and you don't actually do any work for it, that's not a paycheck. That's welfare. I mean, I just wonder where he thinks a paycheck comes from. But of course, this comes from Joe Biden, whose entire career has been in elected office. So he doesn't understand how the economy actually works. He doesn't understand actually having to work for a living. You know, he doesn't have any concept of putting in any work whatsoever. He's been elected to government since, ever since he was old enough to first run for office, and has never worked outside of government. His idea of work is, I just have an opinion. I tell some people to write it down on paper. I sign my name to it. And then I just make a bunch of statements on, camera, on microphones. And that's work. That is not work. I'm sorry, but you getting other people to try and draft up legislation to best interpret, the idea that you just had off the top of your head, and then just going off and talking out of your butt. I'm sorry, that is not work. And so this whole not choosing between a job and a paycheck. Anybody outside of government, outside of elected office, they get their paychecks from job, from their work. They can't just live off of taxpayer money to sit in a chamber and just argue uninformed about a bunch of different stuff. Uninformed arguments, not based off of facts or reality, but just based off of, an opinion about something you don't know anything about. My God, not have to choose between a job and a paycheck. And this is the guy that says big government, is back, and that the government can do more and do more competently. Ugh. Okay, the second thing, tax the rich, pay their fair share. But you notice they never say what their fair share is, because right now the rich pay for most of everything. The bottom 50% of income earners in this country pay nothing. In fact, they not only pay nothing, they get money already being redistributed from the wealthy to them, paying nothing in and still getting a tax return. Right? So I don't understand this whole pay your fair share, when so far their fair share seems to be they're already paying for almost everything. Right? And now you want to expand program and say, hey, they're not paying their fair share, but they never define what their fair share is. What is their fair share? 65% of everything they earn? 70%? 90% of everything they earn? Does that seem fair to you, that 90% of everything that you earn from your hard work and labor goes to government to pay people who are paying nothing into government, or to pay for programs that are not needed, that are wasteful, full of fraud and abuse, and only seem to be designed, and here's the big scam over this whole tax the rich, fair share, expanded government, is that the increased taxes that they're proposing don't actually go towards helping you, and they largely don't go towards, actually implementing the objectives of these so-called programs. No. What they're actually designed to do, besides, increase the power and control of government, is to benefit the friends, families, and donors of the Democrats, because that's where the most of the money is going to go to. Who do you think is going to be hired as contractors, as consultants, as distributors for whatever it is that they're doing? It's going to be them hiring private businesses, the businesses owned by their friends, families, and donors. And so really what they're doing here and trying to create these big programs that solve nothing and only waste money that just disappears into the ether is that they're not trying to transfer money from the millionaires and billionaires to you, the middle class and lower income workers. No. What they're really doing here, and this is the scam they hope you never catch on to with their whole tax the rich, pay their fair share that is undefined, is that what they are really trying to do is go after, the wealthy, on the right, wealthy conservatives take away their money and redistribute it to the left, redistribute it to left-wing donors, left-wing groups, left-wing businesses of friends and families. It's a redistribution of wealth from the top income earners to the Democrats' friends, families, and donors. Of course, a lot of that means that some of the money that they are taking away from these corporations, that happen to be leftists, are going right back to them, so they can say, hey, we tax the rich, we increase taxes, and then we took the money that we took away from them to hire them to implement this, to help us with consulting, to help us with logistics. So they take money away and then they just redistribute it back, but only to the friends, family, and donors of the Democrats. It's not the wealth redistribution that you think it is. Okay. And then, of course, they're talking about the H.R. 1. So now that the Democrats got into power by basically running an illegal election, running elections in violations of state laws, and doing so also in complete and total violation of the Constitution. Now the Democrats, being in control after getting there through violating the Constitution, wants to pass a law in complete violation of the Constitution to federalize elections. And who's going to run the elections? Well, if they get this passed, it will be the Democrats that run all the elections. See, what they are trying to do with H.R. 1 is take the suspension of free and fair elections and democracy that they implemented in 2020, right? Take their attacks, hit the microphone, sorry about that, but take their attacks on free and fair elections, take their, attacks on democracy and make it permanent, to permanently end any hopes of bringing back free and fair elections, of any hope of bringing back actual democracy in the United States. And they're doing so with continued attacks on the Constitution. It is sickening. But hey, they keep getting rewarded for acting illegally and unconstitutionally, so why wouldn't they keep acting illegally and unconstitutionally? If you keep rewarding bad behavior, you keep getting bad behavior. That explains pretty much everything you need to know about the Democrats, Black Lives Matter, and left-wing groups. Why they have gotten more violent, more authoritarian, and more anti-democracy. Because they have been able to get rewarded for their attacks on those things, for their attacks on democracy, for their attacks on the country, and they've been able to get everything they want through violence and corruption. All right. So that's it for this episode. Let me know what you think. Leave some comments if you're watching this on video. And of course, I preferred if you watch this and every future episode over on Rumble. If you're watching this on YouTube, the link to Rumble is in the description below. You can also, if you just enjoy audio, you can subscribe to the audio podcast wherever podcast directories that you listen to your podcast. Here's the podcast cover art right there so that you know it's me. All right. So, don't forget to follow if you haven't already by hitting that subscribe button. Subscribe doesn't cost you anything. It's just another way of saying follow. Leave me likes, leave me comments. Audio podcasters, again, follow, subscribe, leave me ratings and reviews. Please share this on Parler, Gab, MeWe, Minds, on the free speech platforms. If you found this somehow on Facebook and Twitter, I don't know how. Heck, I don't even know how if you found this on YouTube. I don't know how this would get past the censorship, but hey, if you prefer the challenge of trying to get past censorship in order to find this show, I guess that's up to you. If you can share this on Facebook and Twitter, I would be surprised. But if you can and help get this out even more, that would be appreciated. All right. Thank you so much. And of course, I will be back again soon.